Hi, I'm Daniel Schultheis, and I work for Summit Sealants. We are working over here in Gunnison at the Western Campus, and today we are going to be repairing this Terra Cotta stone and glazing. I would just recommend gloves, and of course your hard hat and everything, because you know you're on the job site, protective colors, boots. We're going to jump into fixing this stone right here. We're mainly going to focus on all these spalls, all these chips and nicks and everything, and then just get it reglazed up to make it look brand new again. So for materials, our first one is going to be for our deeper patches. And this is the yawn masonry mortar. And this is going to be more for our big chips and deeper patches like this. And it's a carvable mortar, our repair mortar as well. So that's why we're using it here. Our next material is going to be the thin fill. This is Edison coating, and it's a two-part system. This is the milk for it, it's the activator, and then it's just a powder. And this is going to be for our really small spalls but noticeable, and so we're going to fill those up with the thin fill. Our next material is right here. This is the glazing. This is also made by Edison coating. These are custom colors because we had to match these stones. And what that's going to do is kind of just give it this glazed look again so that it's nice and smooth and you won't even see any of the spalls. Okay, so first step is the yawn mortar. What we're going to do is just get a little bit of water in this bucket. Yawn is mixed with water. What we're going to do is start mixing up the yawn. And you're going to want the yawn to be sort of a drier, not too wet. It's going to be more dry than most repair mortars. And then next, what you need to do is apply water onto where you're going to patch. This is called an SSD. This is so that it opens up the pores, and when you do start patching it, it can bond better. So we're just going to start applying the yawn like this. You always want to pull it into your edge. That way you get a good bond. Some of these patches are very tedious. Oh, there it goes. So the working time, it depends on the heat. But you can get anywhere from, I'd say, a half hour to, you could even carve it 2 or 3 hours later if you really want to. A lot of the times if it's really deep, you want to just put it up in lifts. And with lifts, what you do is just put about a 1/4 inch on at a time, or less. Kind of just shaping it with my finger right now. So we'll let this one sit for a second. We'll move on to this next one here. I want to make sure you get a bunch of water in there because this is very porous. So what it does is it soaks up water like crazy. Now with yawn on the deeper patches, when I went to go be certified for this material, they told you that you want to do a butter coat usually. And what that is just kind of a wet coat. And so that'll kind of get, it's like almost like a primer for applying this. You just kind of spread it all around. And this is for your bigger, deeper patches really. As you can see, that's drying very quickly too. So we can already just start applying more. What we're gonna do is we're gonna build this yawn up. It doesn't have to look pretty at all at first because we're gonna be carving it. You just want to patch the general shape of it. It's important to always pull the material into itself, and like I said, work it into your edges. And this is where you want to pay attention to detail right here. You want to make sure that this is thoroughly patched. All edges are sealed. There's no low spots. That way it looks a lot more professional. I need a little extra material because I'm going to be carving an S into this patch right here. So that way when I carve the S will stick out and I will carve the back around it. So now we just gotta let the yarn sit for a little bit. We gotta get it to a point to where it's carvable, but it won't fall apart too easy. It's sort of a sandy material, so it's kind of easier to carve. Rather where if you're using like patching, you know, concrete overhead or something, you can't really carve that material as well as this. So now we're gonna let that yawn dry a little bit so we can carve it. And we're gonna start with the thin fill, and this is for the small spalls. So this is usually your part A, is what I would call it, because you always wanna put the liquid in first. So what I'm gonna do is just pour a little bit because this goes a long way with this material. And then what you're gonna do now is you're just gonna add material just like the yawn. And then just mix it up. You wanna mix up little bits at a time because this material does go a long, long way. Add a little bit more here. We're gonna mix it up thoroughly too, so you got all the chunks out of there, and it's just a nice smooth material. So this is still a little wet. I gotta add a little bit more material. That'll thicken it up a little bit. You want it a little thick so that it'll set up faster. And the more powder you add to it, it's gonna be a little bit stronger every time. I want to get it right to that doughy consistency. So now what you do is you just get it on your ornamental tool and you just start going over all these little spalls right here. Make sure you're applying it very smoothly. You don't want to leave it rough at all. See how I'm kind of just plastering it on? I like to hold my finger in the front so you feel like you have more control while you're doing this. Yeah, the thin fill is just really meant for thin, small, you know what I mean, small patches and all that. This might be considered, you know, in between. For some reason the yawn doesn't want to bond to it, so that's telling me that this is going to be a thin fill patch because it's a lot thinner. The yawn works better when you're doing thick patches. And that's why we have the material here, because some of these terracotta stones are beat up pretty bad. But as you can see, the thin fill is probably going to work better in this situation. Again, it's very important to pay attention to detail, because when you start glazing this, you want to make sure that all loose ends are sealed. Otherwise, it's going to stick out when you do glaze it. Before I cleaned these stones, they were really dirty. I think a lot of it was from the tree, kind of just, you know, leaking sap over the years and everything else. It was just collecting. It was really sticky. And so when we cleaned it, it was like day and night almost. So you don't want to be applying mortar in anything that is below 40 degrees, technically. They recommend that because they don't want the material to freeze, because then you're pretty much just compromised your repair. It's gonna lose all of its strength if it freezes and then thaws out again. So it always has to be above freezing, and they recommend 40 degrees, so 40 and rising. But as you can tell, I mean, you're working with water, so it's pretty obvious that it will This is starting to dry now. And what I do is I'll knock off all the loose ends. We'll kind of just knock off all the stuff that's on the actual glazing. That way you kind of single out your patch. So this, you can kind of just shape the ear with your finger. So some of these patches, you know, that are on ridges and angles, they kind of take a little bit of finessing. I'm never scared to use my finger if you have a light touch. I believe it helps a lot because sometimes there's some things that your tools just can't do. But it does take a bit of finessing just to get that shape. Make it look like it's natural. What I'm doing right now too is making sure that I'm sealing my edges and shaping the ear to exactly how it was. And you can always reference off something like this. And then just continue to go through and kind of knock off all the loose stuff because you don't want that. You don't want it to dry like that. Fingers are good for blending in too. This is an ornamental tool. These are really actually meant for, patching stone and everything. There's a lot of stone carving artists use these too a lot. This is for detailed work. All this work would be very difficult with a margin trowel. It's doable, but not fun. Yeah, if they're dirty or if there's bad glazing, you can come in with the Dremel and you can kind of not like flake off, you know, bad glazing. Because you don't, when you're patching, you don't want to be bonding to bad glazing because then you're kind of just defeating the purpose of fixing it. Because that, yeah, it'll just pop off because you just bonded to something bad. So it would defeat the purpose. But when I cleaned this, I made sure I got all of the bad glazing off. This stuff you can kind of carve when it's drying. But you gotta be very gentle because you will knock your patch out or dig into it too deep, and then that way you have to apply more. So now that this yawn is at a state where it's kind of dry, you can see that it's really a sandy type finish. So what I'm gonna do here now is the S was missing from state, and I'm gonna carve the S out to make it look similar. So that way when we glaze it, that S will be back there. So you want to start out with just kind of working your edges. And we're going to carve everything around the S, but not the actual S. You have to come from different angles. If you push up on your corner, it's going to break off. So you kind of have to come down on it. This is going to be the glazing, and what we have here is mixed colors. These are custom colors that we had to make just so we can match our Terra Cotta. And all you really have to do is just have a paintbrush. You can actually use a roller too if you need, but I use a brush because you can kind of blend it in really well. And so what I'll do is I'll kind of knock off a lot of the heavy material on here, and then you just start going over the areas in which you put all of the thin fill and everything. You always want to wait until it's all dry. In this case it is. And you just kind of start dabbing it. Just covering up everything you patched. You get a nice smooth finish on it too. What's nice about this too is it can hide a lot of your sins. If you have any areas, you know, that are a little bit open, or it's kind of like painting a wall. And so this is our base color right here. This is our first color we're applying. As you can see, there's tan, you know, it kind of blotches all throughout here. So what we're doing is getting that tan first. And you can see how that tan right here matches this tan right here. So this is gonna take probably about 2 coatings because it's such a porous material that when it dries, you're gonna be able to see kind of all the sand in it. So we'll go over that one again. Give it a nice soft gloss finish. It's already looking new again.
How long does it take to dry?
Probably like I'd say 5 or 10 minutes really, sometimes even less.
I get a slight color shift when it dries?
Yeah. So they have pigments. These are actually the pigments right here. So it's just kind of color coding. And you can put it in a deep base white, so it's like a base color, and then you just mix up to get from there.
Okay.
They'll supply the pigments, but yeah, you just kind of have to eyeball your own color and kind of write down formulas that you have for it. Because like you said, I mean, you're gonna get color shifts and all that, and yeah, once it dries, it'll kind of it kind of dulls down. Because right now it's glossy because we just applied it.
Yeah.
So once it really kind of calms down, it'll blend in more, and then that's when we put on the secondary color, and that's gonna match this white right here. Give it that two-tone, you know what I mean? Yeah, so it's just a matter of this drying now and then going over it. And then after we finish the whole stone, we give it a nice wash again. I've already washed it, but it was just kind of getting everything off. And then what we do is we actually use like a environmental safe cleaner. And what it does is it takes off more pollution, earth growth, like things like moss, because there's moss on the mortar in some areas, and which we're gonna be retuck pointing this too, but we use actual mortar for that. And then that's a whole separate thing, is we have our own color. We had to get approved to match this color. So we had to do color matches just like we're doing with this here, but for the mortar. And that's typically a lot easier and cheaper. If the crack is deep enough, if it's a dynamic crack that goes all the way through, you can kind of fill it up and then it'll bond it back together. But things like this where it's just kind of aesthetics, we'll just open it up, then fill it, and then exactly what we did with here, just go back over with color.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we clean it initially so that we can get that color. That's how we match the color.
Yeah.
Because if we were to match before it was clean, it would be totally different colors. This is the off-white color. And this is what's gonna give us that two-tone. So this, you just wanna kind of blend in. You don't wanna fully cover all the tan, because you're gonna want those spots. With this second tone too, my hand is a lot less heavy. This is where the blending comes in. You gotta really just kind of blend it into its surroundings. I found coffee cups are the best to mix custom colors in, because you can just throw a lid on it. That way it won't set up on you. Because this stuff is really temperamental in the heat. It'll skin, the whole top will skin over if it's really hot outside. And then you're picking out, chunkies. And I prefer brush just because I found it was easier for me, just to, with hand motions and everything. But you can use a bunch of stuff. You can use seafoam to kind of dab it and stuff. You can also use seafoam rollers. There's quite a bit of things that you can do to apply it. It's preference at that point. I've just found it easier with a brush. This is like pretty much the final step. The last step is just a clear coat. And that's just a quick, you just go over everything you did with clear. And that kind of is what seals it. And keeps it UV protected, because the sun will fade everything and anything. And this is water soluble too, so you can just always clean your brushes off. That's why I have the bucket of water here. Just kind of give it a couple. That way you can preserve your brushes and everything. Now I'll apply one more coat of the tan to the yawn. Like I said, it's a very porous material, so you can kind of see once it dries and calms down, you can see all where you patched. So just want to give it a nice heavy glaze. If you notice any areas where you went too heavy on the white, you could always come back with the tan. You can apply clear coat on this now though. It looks white, but when you apply it, once it starts drying, it becomes really transparent, and then it becomes glossy. And this you can put on a little heavier, And you can just even go all around the area that you did, just to make sure you get that nice gloss in there, so it doesn't look patchy. You want to make sure you get it in all the crevices and everything too. And now you can see it's kind of slowly, it'll start to slowly just become clear. Just gives it good protection, you know.